Have you ever wondered if hard work is truly enough to secure the life you deserve? What if everything you've believed about success crumbles in a single moment? Today, I'm going to take you on a journey, a story about a man who built an empire with his bare hands, a boss who lived by the unshakable creed that effort always pays off. His name is Edward Harper, and for decades, he thought he had all the answers. But one fateful night, a fleeting glimpse into the life of one of his employees shattered his world. What did he see that made him question everything? And could he, a man of iron will and rigid principles, change not just himself, but an entire system to save the people he'd overlooked for so long? Stick with me as we uncover this raw, emotional tale of struggle, revelation, and redemption. If stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a lesson that could change the way you see the world. Let's dive in. In the heart of Chicago, Illinois, where the skyline pierces the clouds and the streets hum with the relentless grind of industry, Edward Harper stood as a titan of logistics. At 50 years old, he was the founder and CEO of Harper Freight, a transportation empire that spanned the Midwest with hundreds of trucks and warehouses under its banner. Edward was the embodiment of the American dream, a man who started as a lone truck driver in the 1990s, hauling cargo through blizzards and heat waves, scraping by on grit and determination. He didn't inherit wealth, didn't have a safety net, didn't rely on anyone but himself. Over 2 decades, he transformed his one-man operation into a powerhouse, a name synonymous with efficiency and reliability in the cutthroat world of freight. Edward lived by a simple philosophy: work hard, and you'll get what you deserve. It was a mantra etched into his very being, a truth had proven through sleepless nights, endless hustle, and unwavering discipline. At Harper Freight, this belief shaped everything. Employees were paid well above industry standards, in fact, but they were expected to match Edward's relentless drive. Deadlines were non-negotiable, effort was non-optional, and personal lives were irrelevant. Edward didn't meddle in what happened after his workers clocked out. To him, life was a straightforward equation: input effort, output reward. If someone struggled, well, that was on them to fix. He provided the opportunity. They had to seize it. Chicago, with its sprawling industrial zones and stark divides between wealth and poverty, was the perfect backdrop for Edward's empire. The city's south and west sides bore the scars of economic disparity, neighborhoods where rusted factories stood like ghosts of a bygone era, where families fought to survive on meager wages. But Edward rarely ventured into those parts. His world was the gleaming office towers downtown, the meticulously organized warehouses on the city's outskirts, and the boardrooms where deals were struck. He was respected, even feared, by his peers and employees alike. A man of few words but immense presence, Edward Harper was a force unyielding, uncompromising, and blind to anything that didn't fit his worldview. Yet, even titans have blind spots. Edward's strength was also his weakness. His rigid belief in hard work as the ultimate solution left no room for nuance, no space for the messy realities of life. He saw his employees as cogs in a well-oiled machine, not as individuals with stories, struggles, and silent battles. And for years, that machine ran smoothly, or so he thought, until one cold autumn night in October, when a single moment cracked the foundation of everything he stood for. It was past 9 p.m., long after most of Harper Freight's headquarters had emptied out. Edward sat in his corner office on the 12th floor, the city's lights twinkling beyond the glass walls as he reviewed quarterly reports. Numbers danced across his laptop screen: profit margins, delivery times, fuel costs. He was in his element, a king surveying his domain. But a flicker of movement down the hall caught his eye. The break room, dimly lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb, should have been deserted. The cafeteria staff had left hours ago, yet someone lingered there. Edward leaned forward, squinting through the glass. It was Lydia Bennett, a warehouse worker in her early 30s. He didn't know her personally. Edward rarely knew anyone personally, but he recognized her name from performance logs. Lydia was a model employee, the kind every boss dreams of. She never missed a shift, always volunteered for overtime, and tackled the grueling 12-hour days in the warehouse without a complaint. If there was extra work, Lydia took it. If a shift needed coverage, Lydia was there. So why was she standing in the break room long after hours, her posture tense, her movements hesitant? Curiosity tugged at Edward, though he tried to brush it off. He wasn't one to pry. But as he watched, Lydia approached the lone remaining kitchen staff member, a cook Edward barely recognized. Their conversation was brief, hushed, too quiet to hear from his office. The cook frowned, hesitated, then reached under the counter and handed her a small styrofoam container. Lydia's shoulders slumped in what looked like relief. She murmured something, probably a thank you, before quickly stuffing the container into her oversized tote bag. She glanced around, as if checking for witnesses, then hurried toward the exit, head down, pace deliberate. Edward sat back, his brow furrowing. This didn't add up. Lydia worked harder than most. She pulled double shifts, sometimes even triple. If anyone should have been able to afford a meal, it was her. So why was she taking leftovers like a secret? The thought gnawed at him, a splinter in his usually unflappable mind. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she forgot her wallet. Maybe she was just frugal. But the image of her hurried, almost ashamed movements wouldn't leave him. For the first time in years, Edward felt a pang of unease he couldn't rationalize away. He wasn't an impulsive man. Decisions were calculated, emotions kept in check. Yet, as he rolled up his sleeves and grabbed his coat, his feet moved before his logic could intervene. By the time he stepped outside into the biting Chicago wind, Lydia was already in the distance, walking toward a bus stop. No car, no waiting ride, just her and the weight of that tote bag on her shoulder. Edward hesitated. This was crossing a line, meddling in a way he'd sworn never to do. But when the next bus arrived, and Lydia boarded, he found himself stepping on too. The bus rattled through the city, its dim lights flickering overhead. Edward sat near the back, far enough to avoid notice, but close enough to observe. Lydia took a seat in the middle, her head resting against the cold window. She looked exhausted, not the kind of tired a good night's sleep could fix, but the deep, bone-weary exhaustion of carrying too much for too long. Outside, the city transformed. The glittering downtown gave way to darker, grittier streets. Neon signs faded into boarded-up storefronts, cracked sidewalks, and chain-link fences. Edward realized he'd never been to this part of Chicago, not really. It existed on the same map, but it was a different world. Lydia didn't move much during the ride. She didn't check her phone, didn't fidget. She just stared out the window with a quiet resignation that stirred something uneasy in Edward's chest. How many nights had she done this? How many times had she taken this same route after shifts that should have broken anyone? Finally, the bus slowed, and Lydia pulled the stop cord without hesitation, as if it were muscle memory. She adjusted her bag, pulled her thin jacket tighter, and stepped off into the night. Edward followed at a distance, hands shoved into the pockets of his tailored coat. The air smelled of damp pavement and distant rain. Streetlights flickered, some burned out entirely. The houses here weren't abandoned, but they weren't cared for either. Peeling paint, sagging porches, mailboxes tilting at odd angles. Survival trumped comfort in this neighborhood. Lydia walked with purpose despite her evident fatigue, turning down a narrow street until she reached a weathered apartment complex. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, unlocked a door, and slipped inside. Edward stopped just before the building, his breath catching as he peered through a thin, yellowed curtain. The apartment was bare, not the temporary emptiness of someone moving in, but the stark void of someone living with nothing for far too long. No couch, no table, just a single mattress on the floor, a few blankets, and a plastic crate with neatly folded clothes. Then 3 small heads popped up from behind the mattress. Children, no older than 7. Edward's stomach tightened. Lydia knelt beside them, her movements slow but tender, exhaustion melting away as she saw their faces. She set the styrofoam container on the floor, opening it with care, as if it were precious. The kid's a boy, and 2 girls scrambled forward, eyes wide, movements eager. Not the casual reach of children grabbing a snack, but the desperate hunger of those who'd waited too long. Lydia split the meal evenly, ensuring each got a share, but she didn't eat. She just watched, her face a mask of quiet resolve. Edward stood frozen, the weight of the moment crushing him. He'd spent years building a business, pushing employees to work harder, faster, longer. But had he ever truly seen them? Had he ever considered what happened after they clocked out? Lydia wasn't just working double shifts, she was surviving them. A gust of wind rattled a loose sign nearby, snapping Edward from his thoughts. He took a step back, chest tight, mind racing. He needed to leave. This wasn't his business. He'd seen too much already. But as he turned, a small voice pierced the night. "Mommy, will we have food tomorrow?" Lydia paused, just for a heartbeat, then smoothed the girl's hair with a gentle hand. "Of course, sweetheart. You'll figure it out," she whispered, her smile fragile, a shield meant to comfort someone else, not herself. And just like that, something inside Edward shifted. This wasn't just a personal struggle. This was a broken system. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if hard work was enough. The next morning, Edward sat at his desk, staring blankly at his laptop. The numbers once his refuge blurred into meaningless shapes. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a dimly lit apartment, watching 3 hungry children eat from a container their mother had to beg for. He'd spent the night wrestling with it, trying to convince himself he had no obligation to get involved. Lydia had a job. She worked hard. He paid fairly. If she struggled, that wasn't on him. That was life. Except that reasoning felt hollow now, a lie he could no longer believe. A soft knock at his door pulled him back. His assistant, Clara, peered in. "Lydia Bennett is here to see you," she said, her tone neutral. Edward straightened, his face smoothing into a mask of calm. He'd debated calling her in himself, unsure how to address what he'd seen without making her defensive. But now she was here, on her own terms. That meant something. "Send her in," he replied. Lydia entered, moving like someone bracing for impact. She looked as exhausted as the night before, but there was a quiet wariness in her eyes, a hesitation. She sat across from him, hands folded tightly in her lap, posture rigid. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Her voice was steady, professional, betraying nothing. Edward studied her for a long moment, weighing his words. He'd rehearsed a dozen ways to start this, but none felt right. So he went with the truth. "I saw you last night," he said, his tone even, careful. Lydia stiffened, a subtle shift, but Edward caught it. "Excuse me?" Her voice wavered slightly. "I followed you home," he admitted. There was no easy way to say it. Her reaction was instant, a sharp inhale, a flicker of confusion, then anger, then something colder. Her fingers curled into fists, but she didn't lash out. Don't understand," she said, her voice tight, controlled, like someone fighting panic. "I saw you take that food home," Edward continued, keeping his tone steady, giving her space. "I saw your apartment, your kids." Her breath hitched, and a wall slammed up. Her expression shuttered, shoulders squared. Suddenly she wasn't just Lydia Bennett, his employee. She was a mother protecting her children, a fighter refusing to break, someone who'd faced judgment before and knew how to shield herself. "This isn't," she began, shaking her head, already building her defense. "I'm not here to judge you," Edward interrupted, leaning forward slightly. "And I'm not here to pity you either." Lydia looked at him, really looked at him as, if gauging whether he was lying. She was used to dismissal, used to being told to work harder, used to people seeing her as a problem, not a person. "I'm here because I should have seen it sooner," Edward said. "And I want to fix it." Lydia swallowed hard, blinking rapidly, fighting to keep her composure. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes, I do," Edward said firmly. Silence hung heavy between them. Edward reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a thick envelope, and slid it across to her. Lydia's eyes flicked to it, but didn't move. "This isn't charity," Edward said before she could protest. "This is an investment in you, in the people who make this company run." She didn't reach for it. "I want to raise wages," he continued, urgency creeping into his voice. "Provide better hours, childcare support, emergency assistance. I need your help to do it the right way, to make sure no one else goes home the way you did last night." Lydia's lips parted, but no words came. Her fingers hovered over the envelope, then drew back as if burned. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice tired, vulnerable. Edward exhaled. "Because I built this company, and I let people fall through the cracks. I refuse to let that happen again." She stared at him, then slowly reached for the envelope, gripping it tightly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wasn't used to help, wasn't used to anyone offering it. Edward met her gaze, unwavering. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," he said. Lydia swallowed hard, then nodded. A moment later, she stood, shoulders squaring as she held the envelope to her chest. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. But Edward knew this was just the beginning. Changing one life wasn't enough. He needed to change the system. That afternoon, he called a board meeting, knowing it would be a battle. The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken resistance. Investors in crisp suits and sharp blazers sat around the glass table, their expressions ranging from skeptical to outright hostile. Margaret Evans, his CFO and longtime ally, sat beside him, armed with reports and projections. Across the table, Richard Coleman, a veteran investor, leaned back, arms crossed, already dismissive. "Edward, let me get this straight," Richard began, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're proposing an across-the-board wage increase, benefits, an emergency fund all at once? We're not a charity. We're a business. Our employees are paid competitively. If they can't make it work, that's their problem. What do you think shareholders will say when profits dip?" Edward's jaw tightened. He'd anticipated this. "We're a logistics company," he said, voice firm. "We don't make products, we move them. And the only reason we do it better than anyone else is because of the people on the ground loading trucks, driving through the night, pulling extra shifts. They're not numbers, they're people. And right now, we're failing them." Margaret slid a report across the table. "Turnover is bleeding us dry," she added. "The cost of hiring, training, it's unsustainable. Investing in employees now means retention, loyalty, growth." Richard scoffed. "And if it doesn't work, if we just lose money?" Edward leaned forward, eyes locked on him. "Then I take the loss personally. I'll cut my own salary if I have to. I built this company. If we fail, I take responsibility. But we won't. I believe in this. I believe in them." The room fell silent. Murmurs rippled through the board, some shocked, some calculating. Margaret shot him a glance, surprised but impressed. Finally, an older investor, Evelyn Moore, sighed. "It's time we think beyond the next quarter. I vote yes." One by one, votes trickled in. Not unanimous, not without resistance, but enough. Enough to change everything. With the board's approval secured, Edward didn't just send out a memo. He called a company-wide meeting in the largest warehouse, standing on a makeshift platform as hundreds of employees gathered: warehouse workers, drivers, office staff. The air buzzed with curiosity and uncertainty. Edward took a deep breath, microphone in hand, and did something he'd never done before. "I've failed you," he began, his voice echoing through the space. A hush fell over the crowd. "I built this company on the idea that hard work is enough. I paid you fairly, pushed you hard, and thought that was all it took. But I was wrong. I didn't see the struggles you face after you clock out. I didn't see the sacrifices. And for that, I'm sorry." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, shock mingling with disbelief. Edward continued, outlining the changes: wage increases, childcare support, emergency assistance programs, and better shift scheduling. "This isn't just about money," he said, his voice steady but raw with emotion. "This is about making sure no one here has to choose between feeding their family and paying rent. It's about building a place where hard work doesn't just keep you afloat, it lifts you up. And I want to hear from you. Tell me what you need. Help me make this right." The warehouse was silent for a heartbeat. Then a lone figure stood near the back. It was Lydia Bennett. Her hands trembled as she stepped forward, but her voice was clear. "I've worked here for 5 years," she began, her words echoing. "I've pulled double shifts, triple shifts, just to keep my kids fed. Some nights I didn't know if we'd make it to the next day. But last week, Mr. Harper really saw me, and he didn't look away. For the first time, I feel like I'm not alone. So thank you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. A ripple of applause started, tentative at first, then swelling into a roar. Other employees began to stand, sharing their own stories of medical bills piling up, of missing their children's milestones due to endless shifts, of working through pain just to survive. Edward listened, his chest tight, realizing the depth of what he'd ignored for so long. That day, a spark of trust was born between him and his workforce, a fragile but real connection. In the weeks that followed, the changes rolled out. An emergency fund was established, and Lydia was the first to receive assistance grant to cover rent and groceries until she could stabilize. Childcare subsidies allowed her to enroll her children in after-school programs, giving her peace of mind during long shifts. But Edward knew these were just the first steps. He spent hours with Margaret Evans, his CFO, and a newly formed employee committee to refine policies, ensuring they addressed real needs, not just surface issues. Then came the unexpected turn. At a follow-up board meeting, Edward stood before the same investors who'd reluctantly approved his plan. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice calm but resolute. I've led this company for over 20 years. I've built it from nothing, and I'm proud of that. But if we're going to truly change, not just patch things up, we need fresh eyes. Effective next month, I'm stepping down as CEO." A stunned silence filled the room. Margaret's head snapped toward him, her expression a mix of shock and confusion. Richard Coleman, the skeptical investor, leaned forward, brow furrowed. "You're serious?" he asked, almost incredulous. Edward nodded. "I'm not leaving Harper Freight. I'm shifting my role to advisor, focusing on community programs for our employees and their families. Margaret Evans will take over as CEO. She's been with me from the start, and I trust her to steer this company into the future while staying true to the changes we've started." Margaret blinked, processing the weight of his words. The board murmured, some in approval, others in uncertainty, but Edward's decision was final. He'd realized that true change required letting go of control, allowing new perspectives to shape the company's path. His announcement sent shockwaves through Harper Freight, but it also cemented a newfound respect. Employees saw a man willing to sacrifice power for principle, a rare act in a world driven by profit. As Edward delved deeper into the lives of his employees, another story emerged that shook him just as profoundly as Lydia Sohn, that exposed a different kind of struggle within his company. Jamal Carter, a 38-year-old black man, had worked in the warehouse for nearly a decade. He was a top performer, often praised for his efficiency and reliability. Yet, despite his record, Jamal faced subtle but persistent discrimination. He'd been passed over for promotions multiple times, denied overtime opportunities, and once overheard a supervisor mutter that he didn't seem trustworthy for leadership roles, comments with no basis in his performance. Edward learned of Jamal's situation through the employee committee, where Lydia and others felt safe enough to speak up after the company-wide meeting. At first, Edward struggled to believe it. He'd prided himself on running a merit-based operation. But as he investigated speaking directly with Jamal and reviewing shift logs and promotion records, the pattern became undeniable. Bias, quiet and insidious, had woven itself into the fabric of Harper Freight, hidden beneath the surface of fair policies. Jamal's story wasn't unique. It reflected a broader reality in America, where systemic racism often lingers in workplaces, even those with good intentions. According to studies by the Economic Policy Institute, black workers are more likely to be underpaid and overlooked for advancement compared to their white counterparts, even with equal qualifications. Edward saw this play out in his own company, and it struck him as a personal failure. He'd been so focused on hard work as the great equalizer that he'd missed how unequal the playing field truly was. Determined to act, Edward worked with Margaret to implement mandatory bias training for all managers and staff. He also revised promotion criteria to ensure transparency, requiring documented reasons for any denial. Jamal was offered a supervisory role he'd long deserved, along with back pay for missed overtime. But Edward knew policies alone weren't enough. He sat down with Jamal personally, apologizing for the oversight and promising to keep listening. Jamal, initially guarded, nodded slowly. "I just want a fair shot," he said. "That's all I've ever asked for." This experience broadened Edward's understanding of struggle. Lydia's poverty had opened his eyes to economic hardship. Jamal's story revealed the layered injustices of race and opportunity. Both were failures of the system had built, and both fueled his resolve to rebuild it. Edward Harper's journey teaches us a profound truth. Hard work is vital, but it's not always enough in a world riddled with systemic flaws. As a leader, Edward learned that success isn't just about profit or efficiency, it's about the people who make that success possible. He saw that ignoring their struggles after hours was as much a failure as any missed deadline. By stepping down as CEO, he showed that real change sometimes means letting go, trusting others to carry the torch, and focusing on impact over ego. What can we take from this? Whether you're a boss, a coworker, or just someone navigating life, look beyond the surface. See the stories behind the faces you pass every day. Ask yourself, when was the last time I truly listened to someone in need? When did I last offer help without judgment? Small acts checking in on a colleague, advocating for fairness, or simply acknowledging someone's struggle can start ripples of change. If Edward's story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you faced similar challenges or seen others struggle under unfair systems? Let's talk about it. And if you found value in this tale, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Together, we can spread stories that inspire empathy and action. Until next time, remember, hard work matters, but so does heart.